Paul, welcome back to the Qualitalks podcast. You're an honored guest. Love to have you back.
Hi, Jan. Nice to be back and glad to be invited again.
Yeah, thank you very much. And our topic today is preparation for audits.
Yes.
Let's say regulatory audits or external audits and audits in general. So, but I think it's the most important is regulatory audits.
Yeah, if you prepare well for the regulatory audits, then you're ready for all the rest
For
anyway.
all the rest of them. And
Yeah.
so you should be, of course, prepared for internal audits because this sets your level, and it's important to have a good auditing program in place. But still, you need really to be prepared for the audit. So the question is it a good idea to wing it? Just dive into it?
Well, if you want to get lots of observations to deal with afterwards, it's always better to be prepared because the dealing with observations afterwards rather than at the time, it takes a lot more effort, of course. But also, if somebody's got a good feel for you when you're auditing you, then you're going to get and that's not necessary. So if you're prepared, then you enjoy. I enjoy the audit.
As the auditee or the auditor?
I enjoy as the auditee if I know everything's prepared. If I'm arriving on the day and there's been no preparation, then it's very hard to actually do anything beneficial other than take notes. Of course, you can build up a rapport with the auditor, the inspector, but if you haven't actually done the pre-work, if you haven't made sure that you've got done a review of the last time they were there and prepare your responses for them, prepare an evidence file that you can take them straight through, and then they'll see that you've done everything preferably on time that you agreed last time, and see all the work that you've been doing. Then, of course, you want to have your company presentation. If they've been before, then you'd want to do a presentation that covers what happened since last time you were there. If it's new, then you want a full presentation of the oversight of the company and then down into the details. Usually, it's worth introducing at the opening meeting all the people that they're likely to come into contact with. So then it's not actually for the inspector or the auditor, that's for the people that are going to be involved, because you want them to be comfortable, not just you. And if the people that are going to be involved know beforehand what's going to be happening, you've worked with them, you've made sure that they understand what to expect and the way that they should be answering, and then you introduce them to the inspector or auditor as they come in, maybe for the opening meeting, and then they go off and continue with the day. By being there at the opening meeting, it means that they're not shocked or not surprised in any way. They get some sort of attachment or involvement early on, then they're ready for it. And during an inspection, everybody always talks. What's going on? Where are they going to? Where's this? And they can speak from knowledge. They're not got somebody saying, "Oh, they're really terrible," and they're doing this and they're doing that. And they say, "Well, actually, when I've already spoken to them, and they were really nice and friendly and open and having a discussion with them, and building that connection before you get there, you find that the people supporting you that are while you're hosting the audit have a much better ambience around them. But a lot of people get really stressed. I remember one guy that I used to work with. He was the head of operations, and every time we had an audit, he insisted on doing the presentation himself, even though he didn't have a clue about the detail behind what he was presenting. He'd maybe signed off on some of the SOPs, but not necessarily the detailed ones, because he had his managers and his supervisors doing those. So he was taking people around and finding things out as he was going round, rather than giving the job to the person that actually knows the details, the person that's managing the individual areas, maybe the supervisor, to do the presentation and to do it based on fact. Because the risk when you don't do it based on fact, when you do it based on what you've known from previous, is that the wrong information goes through. If you're doing the audit from the basis that you've got the oversight, but you don't know the detailed knowledge, then the person that you're presenting to, it's quite easy for them later to find out the information that you presented was incorrect. And then that's your first finding. The current practice does not reflect what's documented in the SOP. And that's just by not having the right person doing the presentation in the first place. Because the person presenting should be the person that's doing the job, or at least is close enough to understand all the details.
So we already got into the audit itself and the problems that actually arise if you
Yeah,
don't
instead of the preparation.
plan. So it's good. So we know what can happen. So you come not prepared. You have the wrong people presenting instead of the right ones. It's clear that it shouldn't be like that. Do a quality job even if nobody is looking, if you don't have an audit. So it's of course the perfect scenario that you always work according to regulations, but we know it's not like that, because usually when there is an audit, so there are extra cleaning in the laboratories, and you have extra emails that go around and say, okay, get rid of the sticky notes, and I don't know what, and
paint the whole facility again.
Yeah, exactly. So you start, really dig in. Also, although you should be working like this from in the first place, and we know it's not like that. So there are many problems. So you said that if you don't prepare, you should prepare yourself for a lot of findings that are not there. So is it also like that if you have a good internal audit program?
Well, the internal audit program should be in sufficient detail to be supporting the organization. So they should be vertical and horizontal. So they should be looking down within an organization and within a department, and then they should be looking across between different departments. And they should be the ones that are helping you to be up to date, compliant, and prepared. But of course, it's hard to do that. It's hard for a self-inspection team to have enough time allocated to be able to do the work that would mean that you'd be ready all the time. They can do the routine, they can do the compliance with the SOPs, but of course you need a large qualified skilled team to do that for every single area. And sometimes you find that they're a bit too close to it, a bit too close to the actual work to take it to that next level, because their experience is within that organization. And then you find when somebody new comes in, the first thing they will do, which is what I tend to do when I join an organization, is I get involved in the self-inspection program and identify things that need to be addressed. And that's it's one of the skills that you need as an internal auditor, is to think of it as if you don't know anything. You go into a specific team, a specific area, or a specific product if you're looking across, and you say, right, if I was doing this from nothing, what would I look at? Where would I go? You take your toe around. You look at the base documentation. Then you dig in deep. You choose a specific example and go deep into it. And then as you do so, you usually find that you're going to find certain people involved in different things. You identify the training records, and you go through as if you were doing a full-on audit. And from that, you have to identify any observations. Of course, you're not thinking of critical observations, because you're not going to shut down the organization the same ways that you would if you're external. But if you do find critical observations, well, that's the time to find them when you're doing your self-inspection, because then you can put your CAPAs in place. And a lot of the work to prepare for an audit, for an inspection from an external body, is actually what you would do on your self-inspections. If you're focusing on making improvements, making sure that you are following good documentation practice, making sure that you're correcting all the documents properly in every case, that your SOPs or your work instructions or your policies are all current to what you actually do, then when you get to the inspection, you're going to be fine. Now, what I've done for recent, actually probably for, it's not recent really, it's the last 20 years, is have an independent audit. So you do a gap analysis when you're preparing for a regulatory inspection, or maybe just once a year. And you get somebody that's never been involved in the company, or at least hasn't been involved for 3 years. And you get them to do a gap analysis, a detailed compliance inspection, a compliance audit, which you then use to identify problems within the company, problems within your systems, problems in your facility, problems in your training, anything. And then you go away from that and you've got the input and you think, well, what can I do to address these to make it so that I never have the problem again? So an example of that is moving from a paper record to electronic records. So if you're running with paper records now and you're on multiple sites, there's a high risk of something going missing. And that's often the biggest problem that you've got, is missing records. You have to generate them again because wherever they went to, you can't find them. Maybe they've got 3 signatures already, but you just can't locate them because whoever it went to next, it wasn't logged maybe, and you can't find the record. And maybe the person that has got it, you see it 3 years down the line, and then it comes up and you say, oh, well, we regenerated that one anyway, which is against GMP. You shouldn't be preparing documents that you've already prepared. Now, of course, most of us these days do them electronically. So if you move from a hard copy system to an electronic system, it's not a very big jump from generating all your documents on Word to putting them into an electronic quality management system, because the majority of the quality management systems will now use the Microsoft Office packages to generate the records and the documents, the SOPs, the work instructions that you're then going to use to actually produce your quality management system. Now, the electronic ones then bring a workflow behind that. So your document approval process for those documents is electronic, and you have people that have got their authorized login and their roles within the organization, and you can direct the documents automatically to them. Now, what that then does, it eliminates the lost documents. So instead of having paper records that you're chasing around the company, you've got something that you can track. You've got your metadata behind, and you've got the compliant signatures which you validated. Now, there we come to a different problem. So moving from paper to electronic does bring its own complications. So you're going to have the inspectors looking at your validation. So you've got your IQ, OQ, PQ, which you would with any computer system. But at least it's eliminating a problem of lost documents.
Exactly. And it's also really helpful when an auditor asks you for a document and then you need to run across the plant to find it, and you really want to avoid it. And it really helps when you have it electronically, because even if you scan it as a PDF, it can be that you didn't have the time to do it. You still have it in the hard copy, and you didn't upload it into the server, and then you can forget about it and so on. So it causes problems.
Yeah,
Right.
and if you're generating them in real time, then you've got no issue
You're
because
covered.
you've actually released it based on the documentation you've generated,
Exactly.
or performed the task if it's not a release.
So we talked about SOPs, right? So the basic to uh, having the preparation, like everything, you probably should have a decent SOP that explains you what to do before an audit. So it should be explain what and who should do what, right, before the
Yeah,
audit. So what
yeah. So
should
you
be?
should get together. You should get together as a team beforehand and agree who's going to do what.
Yeah.
Now, it's much easier if that's already standardized in an SOP. You have certain roles. So normally you would have a back room. Now the back room will have the information that you're expecting the auditors to ask for, so they'll already have that pre-prepared. But you'll also use them to actually qualify the documents that you are going to bring in to the auditor when they're on the way in. They're usually in charge of making sure the SMEs, the subject matter experts, are available. Make sure you get the right person to present the right document. Yeah. So you would have somebody that's in charge of the back room. Then you'd have maybe one or two runners. One or two runners. They've got basically they run to do the tasks. So maybe they would go and find people if they're needed urgently. They might go and fix a problem if you found one as you've been going along. You've got something missing, that something that's just been presented, because of course you check through. So you have usually a couple of SMEs that just check the documents before they go in. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you've got the person that's running the room. You've got a couple of people checking because they're checking the specifics, and you've got a couple of people doing the running.
Exactly. So you
Now,
have so you have the people on the ground with the auditors. There probably should be an escort that escorts the auditor. There probably should be
preferably
another
two. Preferably
preferably
two.
too, while because there should be someone who is always ready to answer the question, somebody who reports also to the back office what happens and what is needed.
Exactly. Or you can have one of the runners be coming in every 15 minutes or so to collect.
Mm.
So you would document the request that you've got for paperwork.
Yeah, and if you have electronic system or some chat or something that
Mhm.
directly goes live, it it expedites the whole process.
That's common, but it's actually can be quite distracting if you have to type everything out. So usually people use handwritten anyway. Also because you can then use them to collate requests afterwards and learn from it. So every time you have an audit, you should learn from the requests. And if there's anything that comes up that you find a problem with, well, you make sure you've addressed it for next time.
Yeah. So there should be probably somebody who takes notes. Additionally, someone who is not maybe the runner, but he takes notes of the whole procedure. For example, sometimes when you, from my example, sometimes when I've been in an audit, sometimes I see things that the auditor doesn't see. And then I take notes for myself because I know, okay, oh, good, he didn't, it wasn't noticed, but we must correct it. So I take
So
the
a scribe.
so yeah, exactly. So scribes that take the notes. Okay, we need to take care of it before the next inspection, or or before the auditor asks to see it, like tomorrow.
I do have an example of that. So back in 1995, the company I was with identified during an FDA audit, it was 94, 95, that they didn't have the systems and processes in place for the subcontracted operations that they were doing. So they were missing the technical agreements, they were missing the specifications. They'd all been sent out, but nobody had actually been chasing them to come back. So I got given the role to put that in place. So they identified it during the audit. What they were doing in the back room was consistently identifying where it might go next. So they were predicting from the way that it was questioning what would be the next inspection route, what could be the next thing that they look for. We had some colleagues from the US over supporting us, so they could advise us on what the expected next routes were. And we expected him to go to this technical agreements through the SOPs, and what we found was there was a big gap. Now, because there was a big gap, they thought, well, what we're going to do about it? Well, fortunately, he didn't go and look at it. But within a couple of months afterwards, I had a new job. They wanted somebody to go and set it up. So the systems, the SOPs, the technical agreements, the specifications. And at the same time, we were purchasing a new set of products from a company over in Sweden. So I got to do a new one as well. So sort out the existing one, start auditing, and address the problem all in one go.
Yeah, so you see, there is the benefits of somebody who is looking from external.
Yes, and it's always good to actually learn from an audit. When I go out on an audit on a new type of facility, on a new company, I'm looking at what my agenda is. Yes, of course, but also you can find new ways of doing things. You can often find that somebody has a slightly unique approach. Maybe they've got a different way of checking things in at goods in. Maybe they've got a different way to actually manage the documentation. Maybe I remember a long time ago there was T cards. There was quite a small organization. They were using T cards for their training system. So quite often, an area, if you want to find a deviation, a non-compliance, an observation, should I say, during an inspection or an audit, look at calibration and training. And if you go far enough, in depth enough, you'll find something. I've never been on an audit where those two systems were completely perfect, but there's a level. There's a level that you expect them to get to, and you're not going to raise a critical observation for somebody signing it 2 days after an SOP came live. As long as you've got evidence that they weren't actually performing the task, then you're fine. Calibration. Calibration's a big one. Validation and calibration, because often the problem can be when they change suppliers. So if you use I've gone off to findings again, haven't I? So if you go and you're using one contract organization, maybe you use the organization that you purchased from. They've been doing the servicing, the calibration, everything for your analytical equipment. And then you get to the point where you're ready to move on to another company because they've got to the end of the contract and they don't renew it. They just do it for the first 3 years when it's new. So you move to another company and they will operate in a different way. But what they don't do is close out what the first company was doing. And often you find that there's confusing notices on the equipment. There's confusing stickers. There's different reference numbers. And you have to make sure that they all align with your system. Now, what people often forget to do is the change control. Because one of the big things about an inspection is how you got from here to here. How did you change the process when it was at this point to where it is now? And the easiest way to document it is change control. Change control, you prepare it in advance. You say, this is the scope. This is what we're going to do. You write up your actions. You do them. You close them out. If there's any deviation, if there's anything that you do differently, you write it up, you document it, provide supporting details if needed. And then 3 months, 6 months later, you verify that it was effective. And if it wasn't, then you take additional actions. Maybe you have to put some CAPAs in place because it didn't work the way you were expecting it to work. And it's always the case of keep your documentation, keep your records up to date. Don't go along and leave it till the day when you get your inspection notified and say, oh no, we've got all these that we haven't closed out yet. And then if you've left them, the likelihood is that the supporting documentation that you needed to close out the CAPAs or the change controls have all been archived because that's your routine schedule and you're following that routine schedule. Mm-hmm. So you have to bring them all back out of the archive. Yeah. You have to find all the evidence that you need to support it. You have to close out your change controls, close out your CAPAs, close out your deviations, whatever it is. And it's a lot of work that if you're just doing it right as you go along, then you don't have the problem.
Yeah. So as I said, do it right as if nobody is looking from the beginning. Then you have less problems. But exactly. Let's say you didn't, right? So we are preparing for an audit. Where do we know where to look? So if we didn't, if we know that there are those problems and we did nothing about it, that is wrong from the foundation. But let's assume we don't know what we don't know. So how do we look for it? Now before the audit.
You start by auditing your company. So what I would do is I would go into a company and I would do a systems and process audit. So I would look for compliance with the regulations, and then I would look for compliance with the systems. So the systems, whether you call them policies, whether you call them work instructions, SOPs, and the records that are generated, maybe forms. And I would look for consistency. Yeah. So you start at the site master file or quality manual and you go into the system because then that should show you. And really you're looking to do a gap analysis. Mm-hmm. So the most recent one I did, I unfortunately found a lot of gaps. So I found there were 2 rooms that the quality team were not aware of. So there were 2 storage areas for product and material that was just completely unacceptable from a GMP perspective. There was missing roof tiles, there was garbage in the
Mhm.
corners, there was mess on the floor.
So it's what's
But
a warehouse.
it was two
Okay.
separate, two. It was within the facility, and the two rooms were being used as warehousing.
Okay. So
But
somebody
they weren't
decided that they should store some GMP material there or a product, and they didn't bother to inform the QA about it.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly. So they were classing them as warehouses, yeah, but there
Mm,
were just two rooms within the facility, really.
mm. Yeah.
They weren't dedicated warehousing.
Okay.
And then there was issues with the documentation because it didn't have enough detail. And when I spoke to different people, they were all doing it different ways. The same activity was being carried out as they wanted to. So the base level things that they were doing, so they knew where the files were stored. Maybe they knew the folder. But then I came and looked at the details in the documentation that was being produced. And depending on who'd done it, it was being created in a different way. So for example, when there was a change, some of them they had version 1, version 2, version 3, and a checklist. Now, version 1 was as the profile was first set up. But then when they made an update, they did version 2, and in some cases, version 2 had all of the updates and the original information that was still needed. But in other cases, it was, well, you need to do these bits from version 1, these bits from version 2, and in some cases, some more bits from version 3. But because the checklist was then huge, it wasn't useful anymore because you didn't know which parts of version 1 you still need to use, which parts of version 2 you needed to use that had been updated on version 3. So how are you supposed to get it right? So I looked. Yes, complaints. Why have we got complaints? Because we haven't got control. Your process, the idea behind the documentation is to maintain control of your process. If you have it clearly documented, then you can keep control. If you have something that gives them the ability to do this option or even this option over here, how do they know which one to choose? So then it goes to the person doing the work, the operator, the technician, whatever you call them, and they have a choice. Well, last time I did it this way, but I've got this new piece of paper as well as the old piece of paper. So shall I do it that way or shall I do it that way or a mixture of both? And if I do a mixture of both, how do I know which parts of that one to still do and how much of that one to do? And which parts of this is no longer required? They've got no way of knowing. So they're guessing. And if they're guessing, the chances are they're going to do something wrong, especially if they've got no reference point.
Yeah. So it's a better documentation, better change control processes from the ground.
Yes. Yes, it's making sure that your change control process has got details in it, not just generic top level.
So you mentioned that they did the change, or they moved they used some storage area that shouldn't have been used without the QA finding out about it. So the question is, what is the root cause of that?
It can be culture. It can be culture. So if you've had somebody that's been doing a job for a long time and they've always done it one way, and they've never needed to have the other teams involved, they've never had the wider scope of the organization involved in change.
Yes. So it's probably companies that weren't producing GMP and then switch to some new product, maybe to
Or
different
the
countries.
legislation's changed over time.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So they're used to not keeping the quality team involved. Maybe there's only a low level person from the quality team and the others are off site somewhere else. So there's nobody keeping the oversight. And what it needs is for the people that are there to understand the aspects of quality and the reasons for using the procedures, the reasons for following change control, the reasons for making sure that your team members understand. And the way that I find works best is to actually get them involved. So you work, for example, I had a purchasing guy that didn't like to work through change control. He just wanted to do what gave him the best deal. how to improve the pricing, to how to reduce his costs, and still be able to get the materials he wanted. So one example, he came to me with a change to microcrystalline cellulose. It was a excipient that was going to get rolled out around the world by the company, and they were going to make a significant cost saving because they used it on every single manufacturing site. So they were looking at six figure savings. So I said, okay, so we need to put it through change control. He says, but it's got a global change control. It's all fine. He says, yeah, but we need to put it through change control, our change control process, and verify that the product is still acceptable with this new material. So we did. We had this change control meeting. We went through all the details, and we set up the first trial. So the first trial on the first product, we couldn't get the product to actually compress together. So what we found was nothing worked at all. We couldn't make a single product that we were manufacturing on site with this new material. And then we did some tests on it, a Malvern test, so the particle sizes. And we found that the profile for the new material was completely different. It's much smaller than the profile for the product we were used to using. And the compression characteristics of the product we routinely use was perfect. We didn't get any capping. We didn't get any crumbly tablets, no soft tablets. They were all the right hardness. The dissolution profile was satisfactory. All right, it's not just microcrystalline cellulose, but I think you get the idea.
Yeah.
But with this new material, they came out of the press, they fell to pieces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They crumbled.
Exactly.
Couldn't hit the hardness level. Couldn't form a tablet, an acceptable tablet. And this was about to be rolled out around the world. But they were waiting for the sign-off.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't roll it out because we wouldn't sign off.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Makes sense.
fortunately, maybe we saved a lot of money.
Probably.
And
And
maybe
regulatory problems.
maybe more than they were going to save with the excipient, because if you had rolled it out around the world, maybe they'd have 20, 30 batches, but those 20, 30 batches would have the API in it. So the most expensive component to a batch of tablets isn't one excipient. Okay, they were using a lot of it. It's the actual API. So if they'd wasted that much API, they'd have, I think they calculated that they would have lost the next 5 years worth of benefit from making this change.
Whenever you do changes to your raw materials, you must do a risk analysis and compare the parameters, because many materials they may have the same name, even the same cost number, but they may have different manufacturing process that influences some specific chemical attributes, like the particle size, for example, or maybe some reactions with other material, or temperature and melting points and so on. So you must really compare the attributes really carefully when you do the FMEA, and really compare each parameter and see the differences, and try to understand why there are the differences, and it may be something serious in the end.
Yes. Yeah, and it's the detail.
Yeah, yeah,
It's making sure you've got the detail there.
exactly. And as you said, with those materials, even if they did some trial batches, they probably wouldn't have found out about it until it was too late.
Too late, yeah. Yeah, we did it with without the API. We did it on a placebo.
Yeah, so it's good to have like a PAT labs and some manufacturing labs that do the tests on small scales,
Uh-huh.
right? So
Yeah, we had a development facility, so we had the capability to do it on site,
yeah, yeah.
which was good.
Again, go back to the preparations. So
Yes.
usually we have I don't know, like 4 main departments, right? So we have the quality assurance, quality control, production, and warehouse and logistics, right?
Uh-huh.
So if we take a
And
look,
IT.
and
IT.
IT,
Yeah,
good,
you're always now going to want IT, because IT gets involved in all the validation
right,
work, the
right,
installation work.
right. So at least somebody who is responsible for the quality management systems, and so if you look at each of those departments, so so for the preparation, what each department must take a look at. So let's say we have an audit. So let's start from the QA that they oversee it. So what do they need to make sure internally and delegate to other departments when they know the audit is coming?
So I would actually take it a step back. I
Mm,
would routinely be prepared,
yeah.
as if you're always going to be ready for an audit, always ready for an
Mm.
inspection. Because if you routinely do the work and you have your key performance indicators and you are constantly keeping up to date with your systems and your processes, then when the auditor or the inspector notifies you that they're coming, then you know that you're already ready. If you have a regular routine self-inspection, that if any problems are identified, then you take clear action and you implement the action, you verify it's effective. Then you find that you don't actually have the running around when you're preparing for the final audit. When you're preparing for the next inspection, you're confident already that you know you're ready.
Let's say you have a really good internal audit program. So
Uh-huh.
you do it, you have the information. So then you really need to look at your trends, and you need to look
Exactly.
at the past. So you should you know that you're maybe prepared, but you really need to make sure that everything from past audits is closed,
Yes.
and that you don't have gaps there, because there are sometimes minor deviations that get stuck in the queue, and they're never done. And then you need to maybe go through the system and make sure that all the changes are closed, and all
Well,
the
yeah.
deviations are closed. At least those systematic things, just to make sure that it's done, and maybe alert the other departments to look at their uh, internal processes to make sure that all the changes or that all the documentation is closed.
Yeah. So that's you would use your key performance indicators to identify whether you've got old change controls outstanding, whether you've got old deviations that are lagging on.
Mm.
Make
So
sure that
it's in the best case scenario that you really have already the electronic system.
exactly, because you can use an electronic system to highlight the fact that something is overdue, that it should have completed already, and use the system rather than the people to notify the people that whoever needs to take the action. And then you have an escalation process so that if they don't do it, maybe somebody's left and maybe it needs to be reallocated to somebody else. Maybe somebody's off sick or on holiday. And when it gets escalated, then they action it and make sure it happens. But if, for example, you're not prepared already for your audit, if you're just starting to do your inspection preparation now because you've got an audit in coming up in 6 months, or you've got to 2.5 years since the last one, so you're expecting it. Maybe you've not done the work to actually be prepared. So then the first thing they should do is start by looking at the records. So the way that I would do it is that from the quality perspective, I would get the leaders, the whether it's managers, whether it's supervisors in the different departments, and you say to them, "We've got an inspection. We're expecting it due on this date. Now, have you got any areas that you're concerned about?" And usually the people in the different teams will know the areas within their department where they've got a problem. Maybe they know that they've got an SOP that they should have updated, but they haven't yet. Maybe they're using a workaround because it's the system that they're supposed to have implemented didn't work. Maybe they've got a certain team member that they have problems with. So you get your cards on the table and you talk about where the issues are. Now, whether you do that one-to-one with the individual team leaders or whether you do it as a team all together from across the site, that's down to the culture that's in that organization. So once you know where the problems are, you first start by fixing those. And then you want to do an audit, a compliance audit, a regulatory compliance audit. Now you want to go across the organization, not down in the silos, because the silos being the departments. So often you find the place where something goes wrong is when it's passed from one audit, one department to the next. And because it's maybe not quite clear who's responsible for which part, you quite often find it gets stuck at the interface. Rather than going from one and a clear handover to the next, it just steps in the middle. You've got a bit of a gap. And then somebody else comes along and they need whatever was supposed to be generated, and they try and pick it up. But because it wasn't handed over fully, there's often a gap in the process. So you raise a deviation to fix the problem. But maybe you raised the deviation on your own and didn't refer back to the original person that submitted it. Now, in that case, it may be that they left something out on purpose. There was a problem with it at their end. So then you raise a deviation, but then you lose your audit trail back to the original problem. If you raise a deviation independently, you need to do a thorough root cause analysis, which goes back along the line. Yeah. So then you actually find the contributing factors, and from those contributing factors, you join the dots and you find, oh, well, this stopped because of this. Now that gives you another opportunity to fix a problem. So when you're doing the audit along the line, you're looking at what sort of state is the facility in? Have you got everything appropriate where you should have? Is the design right? Is the design appropriate? If it's not appropriate, have you actually planned to do something different about it already? Now, assuming that's corrected, is it being maintained adequately? Are you finding that you've got little dust bunnies underneath the pallets because nobody's actually moving the pallets and they're just putting the stock on it and taking it off? Is the actual racking getting cleaned? Are the walls being maintained? Have you got an appropriate materials in use? Are the doors shut in properly? I went to one place and they had to push the door shut because the airflow was so strong, the closing mechanism wasn't strong enough. So the door always stayed open. And once you closed it, it blew back open again because somebody at the other side, it was really well sealed building, the extra pressure pushed it back up and it couldn't push itself. So you had potential contamination into the facility all the time. So airflows, what's happening with your airflows? Is the filtration to an appropriate level? Does the flow for the materials, is it appropriate? Have you got a way through and a circular route so that it doesn't cross over? People, do the people have an appropriate route? Can they come in? Do they go through the change? Do they have an airlock to go through? Are they doing their change in an appropriate manner? Have they got the step over in place? Is the cleaning that they do appropriate? Are the right people in the right places? Then you move on to documentation. How are they maintaining their records? Are the records appropriate for what they're doing? Have they got the records in the right place? Are they referenced properly? Make sure they reference them back to the SOP or the work instruction or whatever they use on the site. Make sure you take examples of the people themselves so that you can then cross-reference back to the training. Look at some of the records they generated earlier on. Make sure those are after they were trained. Okay, that's something that's unlikely that you're going to pick up. But you might see somebody that's new to the area. They may admit somebody's new to the area. So that's a good one to focus on. Make sure that the first work that they did actually was after they were trained. Does the training system identify whether they're in training, whether they're being supervised, whether they've completed their training, or is it just left to them? What level of competence have they been confirmed? How have they confirmed the competence in the job? Do they have a spike in deviations every time they get a new team member? And that spike is because the training's not adequate. But what they're doing is they're identifying a retraining for the person because they're saying, retrain them because they're not good enough, where in actual fact, it's the system that they're using, the training process, the induction, the introduction to the systems and processes, and not having the oversight for long enough so that they've got a good understanding of what they're doing. But all these things all come together. They all come together in a process audit so that you can actually see continuity between the different areas. And whereas most self-inspections look down within a department, they rarely have one that looks across. Now, I always like to look across because I know that's the way you find most problems. So whether that's a self-inspection that looks across, or you join the dots between the self-inspections, or you have an overlap. So you have your review of your incoming through your process to your outgoing, rather than just having within the process when you're doing your self-inspection.
Are there any specific examples that may be applicable for specific areas.
So if you go into logistics, into the warehouse, look at the top and look for something that doesn't look the same as the rest of the pallets.
Mhm.
And you usually find that's the one that's been left for a reason that's never been resolved.
Okay.
Look for an area at the back that's isolated from the rest. Maybe it's not labeled, but it's different. Look at the fire exits. Go from the fire exit to the outside. You may find that there's some evidence of people using the fire exit for brakes, additional brakes. Look for skylights. Make sure that they've actually considered the temperature impact for the skylights. Look for windows. I went into one once where they had an automatic opening mechanism on the window when it got hot. No wonder they had loads of flies in there. Look at pest control. Now, when you look at pest control, don't just look at the pest control, what do you call them? The bait boxes. Don't just look that the bait boxes are there. Look that they're set up appropriately. Are they in the right location? Is the entrances, are all the entrances or the potential entrances covered by these bait boxes? Yeah. And then look at the placement of the bait boxes themselves. Often you find that the area's been cleaned and the bait boxes have not been put back in the correct place. So the best way with the bait box is to have guides to actually hold them into place. Now, if you have an automated, often in warehouses, you have an automated cleaning system with the brushes going round and you ride on it and you go around. And quite often you find that they push them into the corner. So the base boxes, you've got like your doorway, and you're going out around your doorway, and often they're in this next corner as you go further out. Now, if this equipment that they're using for cleaning has pushed it into the corner, maybe they've got one for insects and one for rodents, you'll often find the two butting up against each other, and the one that's actually in the corner against the wall has no entrance left because it's been closed at that end by the wall and closed at the other end by the other box. They have to be separated. So you have to make sure the people that are cleaning understand GDP and pest control. Now, they're the people that are often subcontracted. So how do you make sure your subcontractors are trained? How do you make sure they know the details? It's not that you've got to clean this area. It's what's the detailed GDP or GMP requirements that we need to take into account when you're performing the function that we need. It's not like somebody cleaning is the lowest of the low. They're actually really important to the facility. So, for example, I had a problem with wasps coming in. Now, these were not local wasps. These were wood wasps that were coming in from another country. And they had I think it was a bore tube that was like this long. But the problem was people thought it was the sting because it's the color of a wasp and it was coming out of the pallet. Now, okay, they caught the one that got out, but underneath we caught the rest that were in the muck that was sat underneath the pallets that hadn't been moved for a while. So you have to be careful to make sure everybody, not just the people in QA, not just the people in operations that are going into your controlled area, everybody must understand the implications of their role.
Exactly.
And they must understand GDP, everybody in the organization, not just the people doing the work on the line. So, for example, if you talk to somebody in finance, now finance have been are often neglected in a company. Oh, we just handle the money. Nobody needs that. Why do we need to have the GMP training? Okay, so the finance lady goes into operations to meet with the head of operations or whichever role that they're meeting with to talk about the budget. But you've not trained them in GMP. But they're not performing a GMP function. But they've just walked for the last 10 minutes through the facility. And they walk past that product and that product and that product. Is it relevant for them? Yes, it is. So always insist your GMP, your GDP training is for everybody. No exceptions, because it might be that the person that you trained that's not got the routine access to the facility that notices something that everybody else has been ignoring. I don't know if you know about scotoma. The word scotoma is about something that you've got used to seeing
Mm-hmm.
and you're no longer dealing with it.
Yeah,
You've
exactly.
already reported it to engineering. It's already been there 2 months, and now you don't even realize it's there.
Mm, exactly.
I went into a facility in the US. I walked up to a wall, and I could see there was a gap. Not a wall, a door, sorry. There was a gap in the flooring. And when I asked them to open the door. I pointed it out. So the sealed floor went up to there. Then there was a gap underneath the door. Sealed floor again. What's going on there? Where was the seal for the floor? It was up on the wall, just hanging over somewhere that should have been a pipe. And the first thing the guy that was showing me around, the head of the operations manager, whatever his role was, he had a bit of a panic because we shouldn't have been there seeing it. It shouldn't have happened. And he told them to get on and raise a maintenance request immediately. But they were still manufacturing.
Yeah, it reminds me also about a case um, that you really also about trust. You know, so you have contractors that come and do things for you, and you start to trust them. Also about pest control. So I was on an audit in a warehouse, an external warehouse with some colleagues, and on the same day the mouse trap boxes were replaced,
Uh-huh.
and everything was signed from the company who does the pest control, and there is the map of the trips. So we went to the warehouse and we are walking around, and there are the on the map they there it was
Locations.
the locations are noted and everything is signed. They're there. We're going around. Suddenly we don't find one of the trips. It's not there. You know, and we
Uh-huh.
are looking around, nowhere to be found. And and the responsible person who was there, he didn't check. He just trusted that the person signed it, that they're
Mhm.
all there, and uh, and left. And then nobody looked at it, and nobody checked it. But then a few hours later, there comes an auditor, you know,
Uh-huh.
and suddenly you have this embarrassing mistake that because the person, the manager, the shift manager or whatever, he also signed it, right?
Yeah.
So so you need to confirm he also signed it, but the trip is not there. So and then of course, as you said, okay, let's call the company. It never happened before, and so and so on. So check, double check, and if you sign your name on something, make sure there is something to back it up. Otherwise, yeah, you get yourself in trouble.
Only sign it if you've actually verified it happened.
Yeah, so they probably have the same company that comes there for years, and you trust
Yeah.
them. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that your friend told you, "Yeah, I did the test exactly the same, also in the quality control, or I weighed it correctly. I'm working here for 10 years. It's okay. I don't have to do the 4I check. It's okay. Just sign it. Trust
Uh-huh.
me. So still do it.
Exactly. Follow the process. That's
Follow
what
the
it's there for.
process.
Mhm.
Exactly. Uh,
Talking pest control, you just reminded me of another example. So I had a one up in Scotland I was doing an audit, and I approached the facility and I saw a door open, and it was propped open with a brush. So we went past it and continued to the entrance to the facility. Went in through the office. I noticed in the office the door didn't close properly. There was the um, closing bar that's supposed to shut it was disconnected. I noticed that there was a bit of a not very well lined around the door as well, and I pointed it out. Oh, it's okay. We just use this latch. But when we arrived, the latch wasn't on. It was just blowing in the wind. So we carried on through the facility. And we came up to this area with the door still open, still held open, and maybe 2 hours later with this brush. So we go in and we have a look around, and it's got products stored in there. It's got the fridges, controlled storage for fridges. It's got controlled drugs in there. It's got all sorts of things that shouldn't be open to outside. So I pointed it out and they closed it. Carried on through the inspection. We found in the pest control records, right upstairs in the center of the facility, a problem with insects. I don't remember what the insects were, but a really big infestation in one particular area. It was in the kitchen. So I thought, oh, is there a route from the open door to the kitchen? So we checked, and there was. So we looked at the map on the pest control chart, the map that you're talking about, the diagram. And I looked at the route that the pest would come from that door to the kitchen. There was no traps. There was no bait boxes, nothing. So they could just go straight in and straight into the facility. So then the next thing, from that kitchen, was there anything to protect the facility, to protect the operational side of the business? No, because it wasn't facing an outside door. So they hadn't protected it because there was no risk. But there was because it was going straight up the pipework into the kitchen.
Yeah. So you don't think about it. You don't connect the things sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then you have the problem, but you cannot connect it. Why it's happening? Not look at it.
And you certainly don't want to leave the fire escape open with the brush all the time.
For sure.
Well, nobody done a walk around beforehand because they had an audit coming
Yeah.
just to do the basic checks.
Yeah.
They haven't done anything.
Yeah. So so that's why we see that so not everybody works all the time in the best practice way and until the audit comes. So it's a great goal to do it, but nobody really follows it until it's so you have sometimes procedures and you need to give feedback and and review and so on and so on, but nobody always does it.
Uh-huh.
So if you
That's why
don't,
it's important to have it ingrained as a routine.
exactly, it's
If
a
you follow
routine.
it as a routine, then you don't have the panic when you get the inspectors coming along.
Yeah. Because if you don't have a routine and the internal audits, but more than that, the work in a routine that maybe there is a walk around from people from different departments that just take a look at it, because if it's too late and you have even a 1 month notice, even more, and sometimes you have much less, you cannot do everything that quickly to correct all the problems, and it just stacks up, and it's a problem.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So um, another thing that maybe before we wrap it up, um, the experts, right? So there
Uh-huh.
must be experts in place, and they should come, join, go, depending on and what the auditor is reviewing. How do you choose the experts correctly?
So you make sure you prepare with them beforehand. So if you're going to identify experts for specific areas, which you should do, so you should have subject matter experts for every topic identified. So during your self-inspection, you'd have worked with certain people and you know who's giving a good response and who's not giving a good response. Or if you've done a process audit. But then when you identify the people that you feel are right to be the subject matter experts, you then further prepare with them. You talk to them as if you're an auditor. So you tell them, first of all, how to behave, but then you say, well, we're going to do a practice session. And during the practice session, you expect them to behave appropriately. You make sure that you do what's called a pregnant pause. You leave a gap and wait for them to talk. If they fill the gap, then you have to coach them a bit more. if they don't listen to the question and they assume they know what the answer is to your question, you coach them a bit more. Always answer the question that's asked. If you're unsure of what's being asked, question it, clarify, don't guess. I do that on purpose as well, ambiguous questions. So they can take you wherever they know there's a problem. You're there to help them. You're preparing. But if you're doing the preparation, actual training, then you want to make it clear to them. Now I want you to behave as if I'm the inspector. I'm the inspector, so you will be answering the question. You won't be filling any gaps. Be polite, show them round. Business. So you do that preparation on an individual basis. So you'll prepare them as a group. Make sure you've got your SOP, make sure you train them, make sure they understand what it is to be an SME. But then on an individual basis, you verify that they're up to it. And if they're not,
who shouldn't you pick? So probably there are some personalities, or so there are great experts, probably that work in the company and they're amazing at their work, but not everybody should answer the questions for an inspector, because some people are just not up to it, or they don't take it seriously. And I've seen occasions. So from your perspective, who shouldn't you choose and
so
avoid?
you observe when you're doing the preparation with them, you observe their behaviors. So somebody that talks and talks and talks and doesn't know when to stop, then you've got a problem. If they're nervous, some people are nervous and they sweat all the time when they're nervous and they can't get over it. It's not their fault. It's just physiological. They can't deal with it. Some people have been there a long time and they've not kept up to date. Maybe they don't know the details in the current SOPs for some reason. Maybe they're dealing with that their specific area and not the general area. So you want people that understand. Usually you wouldn't pick somebody that's on the line. Usually you wouldn't pick somebody that's got the very specific knowledge, but not the general knowledge. So you get somebody else to take them round, but maybe that person with the very specific knowledge, you just get them to do that certain part. But saying a specific category of person that you wouldn't pick, well, in theory, the inspector can ask anybody. So you have to make sure you've got general coaching, general training, which you've fed down through the management team. But then you actually verify that the people that are gonna they're gonna handle themselves appropriately. They're gonna be smart. They're gonna be on point, and they're confident in what they're presenting. Because nervousness, because somebody's not practiced and done it before, is always going to catch you out. They're always going to slip up.
Yeah, and I think it's also a part of the preparations. As you said, the auditor can approach anybody and ask anybody questions. So it's good to make sure that everybody who works the lines, where the labs are, people who know what they're doing, and probably avoid putting the newest members in that shift. And probably distribute and give some training beforehand to make
training
sure.
beforehand.
Yeah.
The training beforehand for a new person. If the inspector comes to talk to you and ask you how to do something, if you can demo, say somebody says, "Can you take me through it?" I'll just get the SOP. The easiest answer for somebody that is new. I'll just get the SOP. I'll just get the work instruction.
Yeah.
And they
But
take them through
it should be on your desk, basically, if you're doing this job right now. So it was the way I remember when I was in the lab, in the quality control. It was like ABC. You don't start your work before you have your SOP before your eyes. And it doesn't matter if you remember it by heart. It doesn't matter. It should be in front of you.
Exactly. Always the easiest way to get through an inspection.
Yeah, and
SOPs there.
even before, and it was a best practice. Doesn't matter inspection or not. You don't get to work before you have the printed version with the newest version before your eyes, and otherwise And it's a good example of a good practice
Yeah.
because there are many people who work there, like they know the SOPs and the whole analytics from better than it's described in the SOP, but and
Uh-huh.
they could say, okay, I don't need it. Why should I need it? Why should I print it? And probably they also may say, okay, I don't need to document it right away because I remember everything, but it comes back to the best practice, and it's especially for the people who are the most experienced, because when
Mm.
you feel that you're that good at what you do, you may start neglecting some of the things, and sometimes it's more crucial than with the newer members who are a bit more nervous, and they have all the documentation around them and they are documenting by the second.
Contemporaneous
Mm.
at the time.
Yeah, exactly. So, Paul, is
I c-
there anything else that you want to address about audit preparation that we didn't talk about, which you think is important?
Make sure there's enough time. Time is of the essence with preparation for inspections. So if you're expecting it in a certain time scale, because you know when it was last carried out, don't wait for the notification. Prepare in advance. Because if you're doing it in advance and you've got time to prepare, you're going to get a much better result than trying to do it at the last minute in a panic.
Yeah. So good. So what you're saying is anticipate the inspection. So
Exactly.
feel it. Okay.
Exactly.
So maybe have a list. Okay, I got audited from this authority back then, or from this supplier back then. Okay, it's coming. So we should
Yeah.
be ready.
Should always know what's coming.
Mhm. That's a good tip,
Mhm.
because I think that maybe not everybody does that.
No, it's having a plan, an audit plan.
Hmm.
You know when it's coming. You know what's expected. You know what
Hmm.
evidence you need to put together. Make sure you've got it and it's prepared and it's ready.
Yeah.
Don't do it the day before.
Exactly. Perfect. Great. So, Paul, thank you very much for sharing all your experience, and it was a pleasure talking to you about this issue.
Thank you, Jan. It's been a good day.
Thank you for tuning in and watching or listening to this episode of the Qualitalks podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider subscribing and sharing it with your colleagues. Stay compliant and see you in the next one.